Hello, friends. This is Kade. You may have heard of me from a little podcast called Recross the Paths. In my off moments, in addition to my day job, I'm also a musician and I play a little bit of trumpet here and there. And I'm going to play a little fanfare for the Ubercube crew on the natural trumpet I made myself. Calling forth from the castle, Ubercube and Associates, starring Anthony.
Hello,
Stu,
Governor.
and May.
We will
Coming
fight
forth from the
them
court.
on the beaches. We will fight them in the oceans. We will burn their tutus.
Welcome to Ubercube. My name is Kade. Oh no, I butchered it. No!
Do it again.
One more take.
I'm not cutting that.
No.
Do it again.
Totally reasonable. I deserve it.
Standards.
Welcome to Ubercube, the show where we talk about all things cube, but with refreshments. I'm your guest, Kade Goforth, with no known aliases, but I'm here as for this one and only time with your host, Anthony Adams, aka Uberbear.
And Stu.
Hi.
Hey, Kade, how you doing, man? Hey, before
I am
we even
doing
crack
so
into this,
well.
I have such an important question to ask you. This has been just so. Here's my
good.
question: if you could have another piece of art on your favorite Magic card, what would it be, and by which artist?
Okay, well, it's not my favorite card, but if I were just picking one today to be redone, Thought Not Seer is a card I love to play. I love to resolve a Thought Seize that can attack for 4, and I would be thrilled if Nils Hom would take a stab at that one. Just the spooky watercolory flavor on a card that's already kind of spooky, I think would be a neat twist.
That would
Though
be-
we've already gotten like a half dozen Thought Not Seers nowadays.
Yeah, I can totally see that. So, welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you on. And I am a huge fan of Recross the Paths. Before we even get going here, let's talk about Recross the Paths, the podcast. What is it you do? Tell the listeners how they can find you, where they should listen to, and what the show is all about.
Well, Anthony, that's far too kind. Recross the Paths is a little project that's just over a year old at this point, an opportunity to connect with awesome people in the cube space. I just try to make it a point to spend some time, ask some questions, and give people a platform to celebrate what they're most excited about in the cube world. That podcast is available any place fine podcasts are hosted, to my knowledge. I'm doing my best to get it out in the world, but it's honestly just it's been a great experience for me to learn so much and really to just connect with so many people who are really good at this craft.
We talked a bit about your podcast, and I will say this, and this is not a detriment or about any other show, any other podcast, but I will say this: yours is the easiest to listen to for me personally.
That is true. Like, I travel a lot, and if I listen back to, say, for instance, Stu and I, while I'm driving, my mind will wander, and I'm not a safe driver. I will start just kind of tracking it too much. Something about your podcast is, I guess, calming. It's relaxing. It's informative, but it's not distracting. It's so chill. It's got a vibe about it. And the way that you form questions, or the natural questions, how they come about and how your guest, everything feels so authentic. And it's an easy listen to on a long drive. So that's the weirdest compliment I could give someone. But what I mean that
I've known you for a long time.
It's
That
chill.
is not the weirdest compliment that you can give someone,
it's-
but it is a legitimate one,
It's
and it is
chill.
an authentic one.
It's
so
chill.
well done.
It's the experience is so, you don't have to rewind back to get the point. I understand what you guys are talking about. Nice flow. Anybody that hasn't listened to Recross the Paths, I 100% recommend it. That's it. Kudos. I love your podcast.
Oh man.
Good stuff.
No, that's charming to hear that it's such an encouraging thing out there, and believe me, it means a lot to hear that it sounds authentic, and I hope that it is authentic. You know, that's one of those that I would hope that I'm the same person when we cross paths at a convention as when I'm at a tournament. And as for calming, I mean, my kids are running around in the background right now, so maybe it's not always that way, but But that spirit is there. We
Good.
just want to be enjoying a moment together with each person.
It's wholesome.
Yeah,
I think it means a lot.
we're parents too. We got barking dogs, and I got an angry teenager, and we got all these things too. So we know what's up. Yeah. You'll hear a door slam if you ever record at my house. It's my kid telling me to get out. I want to use his computer, and it's better than my laptop. So we understand. So before we go any further down this conversation that we're about to break into, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to ask Kade, what are you having to drink on this particular episode?
Well, I'm certainly staying hydrated. That's an important part of it. So water's there, but I would be remiss to not have a fun drink to go with it. And Sprecher is certainly my drink of choice for fun memories with Cube friends, though this is the lower calorie version as I'm an adult and I have to make some critical decisions for myself.
Yeah, you get like lower ID'd, like where's your Chuck E. Cheese card or something like that. In order to, like you're not getting that high octane Sprecher. You're going to get this low cal.
The original Sprecher that I was introduced to at the first CubeCon has 104% of your daily recommended sugar intake, and I would vibrate through the walls, guys. It would not work.
Neon Rainbows IPA. My wife brought this to me the other day. It's like I don't know, it's like a 1980s neon sign just blowing my face up right now.
I love it.
I'm excited to try it out.
I love the pattern. I feel like Joan Collins should be wearing a dress with that pattern or something. It's awesome.
Donna Summers or something's going to sing when I open it up.
Exactly.
What you got?
I'm keeping it simple. I'm having a glass of wine.
Okay.
That's it.
Let's go ahead and crack open that Sprecher in this weird... Everybody listen. Do you hear Donna Summers? Here we go. Nope. All right.
Oh. It's still there.
There's a technology there.
Gloria,
right?
maybe
no
Gloria.
one steal that, but one day we're going to have beer that plays a song when you open.
Like Gloria Estefan turned the beat around or something?
I think so.
Yeah, that'd be pretty great.
That's the future.
That's what Sprecher should play. All right.
Greeting cards there.
Yeah.
Happy birthday. You know, something like that. I think that'd be...
Turn the beat around. Like, So.
Turn this beer around?
Turn this beer around. So we've got a weird one. And this is going to be one where we did want Kade in here, and I really wanted May. She may or may not visit at some point in this episode. She might do a pop in. Micro changes versus macro changes. And I knew the minute that I wrote this down, and I tried to form my thoughts that there is no way I could approach this conversation without going into some thought technology, without going into someone that had more, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? More linguistics based around the game. We need someone who can speak the jargon and whatnot, because there's a point where it is a game, and sometimes when we go so much into the minutia, that's what we do at podcast, right? We just dive into things that maybe don't need to be dived into sometimes. Maybe we should just say, this card is fun. Hello, welcome to the show, May. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing wet. I'm very, very wet. So much water. I was not prepared for, for context, I was getting ready, right? And I was like, oh, okay, the show's about to begin. And then next thing I know, I was like, that back door is starting to get a little wet back there. And I was like, oh no, it's getting real bad. So I started having to set up the pump. I was having to bucket it out. It was getting pretty bad.
May, you are folding right into this conversation. So before we go any further, what are you having to drink besides water?
I thankfully am not drinking water this time, as funny as it would be. I actually have these orange cranberry fruit patch sours.
Nice.
Ooh.
Micro versus macro changes, to bring it all back. When I first started kind of writing this down, I just found myself kind of getting lost and going down a rabbit hole. Couldn't really get out of it. So I really so happy that May showed up and Kay showed up, because Stu and I could not do this alone. This is someone where you need a lot of perspective, I think. And I think there'll be a lot of viewpoints, and there'll be a lot of thought technology and, jargon, as I mentioned before, et cetera, as we kind of progress through this.
Can I make a point about this? What's always fascinated me is the personalities and other aspects of the daily lives of the curator. You are an engineer.
Correct.
I am an engineer. Different kind of space, but we both exist as engineers. I wonder if this is kind of a symptom of what our day-to-days are, right? What our 9 to 5s, Monday to Fridays or whatever are like. Do you tend to find that you get too much into the technical side of things? Because I will say that that's almost a problem with me, even at my job at times, that I'm getting too technical and not understanding the audience and kind of getting a little bit lost in the weeds.
Yes and no. I think there's purpose to having conversation that we're about to start here. Not that we're going to be able to identify or put labels on everything that we talk about, but I think when we have these type of conversations, we do a deep dive into something that may, seem a little bit like we're on up in a lectern, or we're doing kind of, I guess, an academic conversation about magic. It serves the purpose of communication in the long run, so that when we communicate, say at KubeCon or a small event, and we're trading terms and what we've done, and in this case we're going to say macro and micro, and what does it mean to Kade versus what it means to me, so that when we're having some kind of shorthand terminology to communicate, it eases the knowledge spread, right? It kind of makes an evergreen term that we can share as game designers, as cube curators amongst ourselves, so that we can have a language and terms that we can understand.
Well, let's ask that question, right, Kade? Macro versus micro. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, my understanding as we're looking at changes to a cube is it's just going to talk about the scale, whether that's something that's going to impact maybe a card or two, or maybe it's going to be something bigger. I mean, you think about like a repair to a car. There's going to be some changes that are just swapping out one part for another, just making sure it's tuned up the way it ought to be. There are others that sometimes you got to replace something more significant, and that's going to be more than one thing. Maybe it's a whole system of how something works. So I think just broadly, when I'm thinking that way, we're just talking about a difference of scale that way.
Yeah, order of magnitude when we start doing this stuff, right? One card versus... Okay, let me ask you a question. I'm going to present this to both May and Kate. Before we even go down this, let's just do a quantity. Let's make it semi-quantitative. If I say a micro change in your mind between the two of you, how many cards does that equal to? Is there a number, a scale, an amount?
I would consider less than... Okay, so I guess it depends on the context. If we're talking about the context of an entire cube, 10 cards I would consider, 10 cards and lower, I would consider that a micro update, right? Because 10 cards can be divided across a bunch of colors. It can be put into a bunch of, artifacts. It could be in any other place that could affect balance. However, once you're taking it into the context of, let's say I'm switching in, 10 more artifacts and then cutting 2 cards from every color, right? For each of those colors, it was basically inconsequential. But for the overall pool for artifacts, you now have a bunch more artifacts, right? It drastically increased that availability. So when you're taking it in the context of this is a package, this is a particular change that I'm trying to incorporate in order to increase the balance of something, then it can be considered a micro or a macro. However, the little asterisk here is that when you're taking it in the context of, say, a package for a color, right? So I have a very specific example in mind. I have a set of werewolves, for example, and I have been looking at these werewolves for a good portion of time. And I have been on the fence of whether or not I wanted to put them in the fake heap, because
never
I already
make
have one
direct
werewolf,
eye contact to a werewolf. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that now as we move forward.
But my point is that once I get to 10 werewolves, right, that's not an archetype, but it supports some of these other things, right? It starts becoming more of a relevant theme once you get over that 10 threshold.
Okay, so the magic number she picked was 10. Let's pretend you didn't hear all that, Kade. Let's see, do you agree, disagree? Is there a quantity? If you were going to use the term, I'm making a micro change to my cube, and we're just going to streamline that and make that simple. Hey, I made a few micro changes. Or I made a macro change, and when you're telling me that, how do I interrogate that information?
I have to imagine that my answer is going to be a lot less satisfying, because I think it's very difficult to draw a line on what is micro and what is macro in terms of a number. I like to think of when we think about a scope of what's impacted, I think maybe a number of cards in my mind is somewhere around the 3 to 5 range comparatively. But that's only because a lot of these micro changes, quote unquote, can have far reaching impacts. I think May mentioned up to 10 cards of change, perhaps. Let me try that again. if we've added a number of removal spells, or perhaps we've changed the density of creatures at a certain range, like that can change the texture of how a lot of games feel. So it's then very difficult to say, I only changed 4 cards, therefore it's like, well, that may change a lot of things. But on the other hand, if you're only changing a few cards, if you have, say, a 360 or a 540 cube, you may not see some of those changes until a couple drafts down the line.
So you made some really good points there. So one was the impact to the experience. So these 5 cards that we're calling a micro change, conversationally lighthearted, might be very impactful to the environment, even in a small quantity. It comes into we get into semantics here, right? Are we talking about quantity, or are we kind of talking about, quality check of this idea?
I think you're making the argument that the numbers really don't matter, right? Because one card, you could maybe argue, okay, if I change one card, how likely is it that is going to be so dramatically impactful, right? But 10 cards could be, I am changing 10 lands, and they tap for the same colors, and maybe they have cycling. And that's the only other thing. And there's no other cycling package.
Triomes to Surveil lands.
Could be.
That changed things.
Well, Triomes to Surveil lands, or even Surveil lands to Tri-lands, I think could be quite
if
significantly
you'll entertain me
impactful.
for a second. Sorry to interject. But the reason that I'm picking 10 as that kind of magic number, right? So let's take in the context of you have a 360 card cube. 10% of that cube is 36 cards, right? Which means that 10 cards is about 2% of the cube. If you're taking it in the context of, for the overall scale of the cube, it's only a 2% change, relatively speaking, in terms of how likely those cards are going to show up and whatnot. Not only just as a matter of what those cards are or do or whatever, but as a literal fact of that is a 2% change to your cube, right? However, once you start taking in the context of, I just took my color that was, say, around 50 cards, right? Like in the Fey Cube, they sit around 50, right? Changing 10 cards in there is 1/5 of the pool. 1/5 of the pool for that color has been changed, which is why I picked 10 as that magic number, because once you start getting into the threshold where it stops being how do I put it? A percentage difference, and it starts being a package difference.
I think
right?
the language barrier does matter there with that idea, right? 10 gives something for someone to look, I made a micro change in my cube. All right, 10 or less. Sometimes those numbers are helpful from a prescriptive manner. Hey, you want to make I recommend going no more than 10 cards. Do a little micro change. And that's just a little fast kind of, it's not jargon. This is just a conversation we're having, right? When we label things. But I do like the idea that these two words, macro and micro, also interchange with, as Kade pointed out, the impact of those cards once they're injected in that environment. Those 5 cards or those 10 cards can yield effects that are much larger and much broader than just the simple count. But the simple count is something that is easily translatable. Say we're at CubeCon and I go, I'm making a micro change to Uberbear's Artifact Cube right before the event. And this is all semantics, not really necessarily needed, but it is. Sometimes these terms have meanings and they're a way of translating stuff. Now that we kind of got that groundwork of we have different kind of layouts and numbers and all that, and let's present this to Kade. What are things that, in your mind, running a cube sparks the idea of a micro change, and frequency, and what would cause that to happen, just generically speaking?
Yeah, I think there's a really helpful framing to back out on just a tiny bit. And often when we're looking at changes, it's to consider what is the problem I'm trying to solve, or what's the experience I want to promote. Because I think sometimes there's a temptation to be like, well, a new set's come out, I've got to make a change. Or, oh, well, I got to go to my LGS and pick up some new cards, I got to swap some things out. And I think first things first is to acknowledge you are allowed to make any change you want whenever your capricious whims guide you that way. You're in control. So feel free to make those changes. But I think asking those kind of questions, what do I want to push toward, can help us then determine, well, if I need to make a change, how big does it need to be? So you talk about what's going to push me that way. Maybe the easiest is hey, this card, whatever that is for you, is a problem, right? A single card change is about the easiest swap to make. Insert your favorite problem card here. When you see it on board or you see it in a draft, and it's a black hole gravitating everybody's attention to that one thing, well, that's pretty easy to just go, well, okay, I can make a swap here or there to make that work. the bigger it gets, the harder it is to make decisions about, well, how do we quickly address this, or how do we summarily address all of this? So not just looking for single cards necessarily, but like when we say, are players having the experience I want them to have? You can ask things like, am I seeing the archetypes I want to see expressed on board? Am I seeing play patterns that I want to see in games? Am I seeing decks look the way I want to in the way that players are putting them together? And then using that to inform if and how you want to change. And that's all a question of feedback, right?
And it's all open-ended. So as the listeners, you process what we're saying here. Again, I want to reiterate, these terms, I know I've said it already, are just for communication. They're tools, right? So when we say this, Kade's making a micro change. It's just an assumption, commutative, right? And then macro, what does that mean to you? But I'll just put that out to the listeners. When these terms, and you express these as the listener within your cube environments, are you communicating from a player perspective? What does it mean to you? Because we're always curious, right? This isn't a one-way conversation. We're not just speaking to these mics to you. We would also like for you to give us your feedback, because it's always neat to see what the context of these things that we talk about, right? So as we kind of move through this, we're going to do we'll do some applications, and we'll go back and forth. Kade's got some really well thought out notes. So we'll do some back and forth to give some context to what we're talking about. And as you stated, some of the guidelines that you put were like, are you doing a singular card because it's promoting a bad play experience? Or are you taking on an entire werewolves package, even though you said it was 10? I want to push on that one for a minute. There's a lot of like feelings that people get from werewolves. So now, they're two-sided cards. I don't know if is less impactful, even though the quantity is 10, say, than introducing 10 cards that players now are going to take out, flip over, have to understand how day-night works, etc. Right? That kind of leans back into what Kade said. Like, that's not as benign as I put 10 things in. These 10 things are just going to spread across the board.
Day and night werewolves. Day and night's not even close.
These are the original ones, right? Even so, they have a layer of complexity intertwined with them, making the number 10 seem less to me like a micro change, more like that's something that would be impactful to the cube's atmosphere. And I would almost qualify that as a macro concept. Like, it changes the experience, even though percentages don't apply there.
No, that's exactly why I was making it clear, like, by comparison of, hey, within the within the scope of this color, that's a huge change. That's 10 cards that are now dedicated to, like, this one mechanic, right? It's not enough that I would feel confident to say, yeah, this deck exists, because, we can see by the entire 360 cards that it's just not percentage-wise high enough. However, it is important to note that if I were to sit down and switch out, say, 10 rare cards for 10 common cards, you're going to experience a difference in that cube. There's going to be a difference. And it's a large part of that qualitative versus quantitative type changes. I say this because I come from the perspective of I rarely do small changes for the fake cube anymore. Because usually when I'm taking small changes for the fake cube, it's usually like hot fixes. It's usually because there's something that drastically went up in price, like in the case of like Wolverine Riders, where that was already a really strong outlier card for the cube. And losing that was huge because it took Selesnya from being like, this is like one of the best colors to being like probably third best right now. Like that was a huge change because they just lost one of their major bombs. They didn't just lose some random elf in the woodwork. And it's a big reason that we kind of have to come from the perspective of the math sometimes doesn't particularly matter when the card quality tends to outshine that, right?
That's where I wanted to land. And that's where some of these, let's distill this down even more. Let's take all this complexity out. Micro, macro. We made these terms. We made it complicated. This is kind of the gag reel that I'm doing now, right? And this is how we talk amongst each other, and we'll do discords and communicate. But also, I think you can distill it down to what constitutes a macro change. I'd say major. It's a major change. Major brings back subjectivity to the idea. And then micro change, a tweak or a minor impact. That still leaves it open so that you can be quantitative and qualitative in the same sentence, not making the language barrier any better here, but still gets the point across. Do you agree with that before we proceed, Kade?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe a helpful way to think about that is if you're trying to determine if that's helpful to you to determine between micro and macro for what you're engaging with. I think as soon as you start thinking about a broader pattern versus a particular card or event or maybe a certain set of things, that may be a helpful break. It's like, if the game is not playing out how I want, okay, we probably have some bigger changes that need to be made. Or, hey, this card didn't look right, or the way these two cards interacted, that's not something I want to see again. Maybe a small fix is sufficient.
To kind of piggyback off of that as a question, I want to propose the thought of, when people are curating their environments, do you think that it is better to take small strides when you're trying to change like how your environment is functioning, and then take lots of small changes to get to where you're trying to be? Or is it better to just say introduce an entire package all at once and then see how that entire package does?
Yeah, like small mouthfuls of the whale or small bites versus, I get what you're saying there.
I think that's, again, quite individual to the curator, right? Because we have a bit of a running joke with our friend Bill, who will make like 50 changes. And he'll be like, oh, I didn't like this one thing, so I changed 50 cards.
So he does do bulk. So we'll skip ahead. Let's go ahead and get to the Bill part then. So Bill was a case study here.
Well, I think one of the helpful things with that too is how frequently you play your cube is going to determine how interesting it is to make changes and how big the scale of those changes is. If you only get to play twice a year, well, then you probably want to make significant changes, or you may determine, hey, like this is big enough that I want to make sure that it's fixed for the next time. Or it's like, hey, I want to make sure that things are stable enough so when my friends come back and play this again, it's a familiar enough experience. So determining what you want on that can be valuable too.
So our good friend Bill, and it was a point that I was going to make as we work through this, will do 30 card sweeps, and it's kind of has been a running gag in our group. And it'll just happen. Like, I think I'm going to change out like 25, 30 cards. And to me, that like is appalling. Like, oh my God, like, what's wrong with your cube? Did you break it? I don't even know where he puts all these cards at. He could have made like 5 more cubes from all the cards he's cut out in chunks and replaced it. Would you agree with that? Every time we do something.
Yeah.
It's so...
It feels like every time we've played and we've given him a little bit of feedback, and it doesn't necessarily have to be big dramatic feedback about this archetype was underpowered, this was overpowered, this card didn't work as I expected it to. It could just be a, hey, this was good. Maybe 1 extra damage on that one creature might help. And it's like, oh, really? A 2/2 instead of a 3/2. Let me change 47 cards in my cube.
It feels like a modular cube. Every time we play this cube, I'm like, I got no meta. I don't know what I'm doing. That to me...
That is the meta.
But that
is Bill's meta.
Chaos.
Bill's meta is chaos incarnate. I want to take 47 cards and change them in my cube.
I want to add this. We're going to talk about Bill, which is in here, a good friend. We love him to death. And his cube is Bill's Synergy Cube. I think that's right?
Bill's Pockets
of Synergy Cube. All right. So Bill changes cards. He does change them with purpose. Like, he wanted to put in that new... So Start Your Engines came out, and Bill's like, I need to include this in my cube. I would have never thought that you would do that, but he does do Pockets of Synergy. So his cube, by the idea of it, is looking for small little micro subsets of cards that can find interactions with other small subsets of cards that aren't necessarily clear to everyone that's playing the cube, right? You just have to kind of see the lines. So we use, like, we talk about max speed or whatever it is. He just saw that come out and he's like, I want to intertwine that in my cube. He may have put 4 or 5 in there, but he also did 30 cards, but he finds these interlocks. He's kind of like a Ryan Sachs in our group, right? He's got this thought process that we can't see, and he just starts solving the meme with the person solving all the math problems. That's Bill. And he'll just upload 30 cards. Would you call something like that, I changed 30 cards, a macro or micro change? And I think Bill would argue that's micros, a stack of micros that became, if that makes sense, for a subset, versus he wouldn't see that as, I just changed out 30 random cards. They're all with purpose and intent.
Yeah, and I think that's where, as much as we love our terminology, the deeper we get in the cube space, where that can kind of fall apart some, right?
Does,
it's like,
right?
Is this micro or is this macro? I think something helpful to underline, especially for Bill here, is that, just because you're making a change, that doesn't mean that there's a problem, or that doesn't mean that we're fixing something wrong. There can just be a desire for a different experience, and that's, in my opinion, totally fine. So, we could try to define it in a particular way, or we could sometimes get our shins barked up a little bit about like, oh, this isn't exactly what I remember, what I expected. But man, if it's their cube and they want to change it in that way, like, that sounds sweet to me. I'd love to play a fresh cube every time I dig it up. That's part of the joy for me. But I can also see the draw for, like, I want to sit down and know that, hey, that my Pestermite is still in here. That I can still do whatever it is.
That is the mentality, though, which is hilarious to me.
Yeah, it's just, interesting because we kind of have to remind ourselves that we're deep in the weeds, like in terms of the cube community and our experience with building
Yes.
cubes and whatnot, and us being like, this is a micro versus macro change. And meanwhile, the people that we're talking with, their eyes have already glossed over. They're like,
That's exactly where I'm at.
Whatever you say, curator.
There is a point to what we're talking about. All these semantics we're doing, as you hear it cave in on itself, is happening. But let's do an exercise together. It's less an exercise. I'm going to give something that occurred to me. So at KubeCon number 3, where my FemCube was featured for the very first time, it got, sorted out amongst 4 different drafts throughout the day. And at the end, as I do and everyone else does, I go around and ask, what was your experience like? And multiple people said to me, my experience with one particular card, which was Elspeth's Sun's Champion. For 4 colors and white, you get a Elspeth Planeswalker, which has 4 loyalty. +1, put 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield. -3, destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. And -7, you get an emblem with creatures you control get +2/+2 and have flying. This card is iconic, and it is the FemCube. For those that aren't familiar, that don't listen, this may be if this is your first time listening to this podcast, bless your soul. I'm sorry. You may have to skip ahead to minute 30, but by now I've already told you to do that. But while we're kind of talking about this card was at one point a vintage staple. At one point, this card was known in the EDH community. This Elspeth as a character is very important to some of the pillars of my FemCube. Some of the most iconic women in Magic, Elspeth happens to be one of the stories that matter the most, right? In my personal opinion. I wanted to represent this card for a lot of reasons. Flavor, and it wins games, and it's a powerhouse. Before we start talking about the problem solution and how I managed this card is too strong for your kind of peasanty vibe of the FemCube, when you asked me, Kade, what the speed of the cube was, the best way I could describe it was kind of a pushed peasant cube, right? A thematic pushed peasant cube, about that speed. So Stu kind of said maybe 6-7 turns is where you expect to win a game.
Yeah, I would say about 6. We'll clock it around 6. Yeah.
On speed, right? There's no, I went on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. If you'd done that, things went south. So this card is strong. Kade, what are your thoughts on Elspeth Sun's Champion in my cube? You're familiar with it. Before we even start going down this road.
Well, certainly I mentioned we were talking a little bit pre-show too, that I started playing, right? Theros was the second set I drafted. I started in M14. So I got to lose to many an Elspeth Sun's Champion. So I have a lot of fond memories of that one. In an environment like this, I think there is a value in being able to close the game, that when certain things happen, that you push the game to a conclusion one direction or another. I think Elspeth asks a very loud question that demands very specific types of answers. And so determining whether or not you want to include those kinds of answers or whether you want to engage with that in a different way, I think those are big questions to ask. I'd love to unpack that here in a moment too, but I know you approach that in a particular way, right?
Yeah, I kind of did a reverse thought process of what we're doing. We have what we'll call a micro problem, an individual card. We're just going to categorize that, right? And then the approach to her is going to be, we could call this a macro approach, right? And originally, the way that you would deal a Planeswalker in that environment was from creature attacks. I know these are all kind of common sense answers. Creatures attack it, kills the Planeswalker. Or if you run things that says, I target Planeswalker, I kill it. Or if you have a spell, say like a lightning bolt, that burns the Planeswalker and kills it. But now we're talking about something that immediately goes to 5 loyalty. And that creates an interesting kind of dynamic with the cube. We can't have the expectation was brought to my attention by players that my rivers are just going to run through, because this thing she kept making 3/1/1 white soldiers. So their attempts to directly attack this Planeswalker were constantly thwarted. Anytime they got a creature that's large enough to threaten her, she blew the board up and brought it back down to size again and continued to threaten with the lower scale creatures. That's kind of the play pattern of a card like this. It is a control finisher, and I wanted a strong kind of win. So I wanted a strong win, and I wanted something that was on point from the FemCube, from a thematic standpoint. So it check aesthetics, right? And it cost 6 mana. Game's got to end. These are all kind of me digging my heels in with this. But I couldn't turn away from the fact that players simply couldn't deal with it. There was no real form of interaction at that time. And if you didn't draft Burn and you didn't throw 2 lightning bolts at it, which are not in there, right? Or you didn't attack it with a creature, it got through, then lightning bolt. You had to do like almost subsets of 2 to deal with this if you didn't have to go past the 3. If you didn't have the direct kill cards, which are limited because of the thematic restriction of it must be a woman on the art, this creates a whole nother level of tension. So then I had to step back and walk away. I have a choice, a path to take here, right? Cut the card that I love and fits themes for a lot of reasons, or try to come up with a solution that's bigger than her that could play into other ideas. Is that track so far, Kade, before we proceed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a couple of, you have several different directions you can go here. And I want you to get to share what you did first. And then I think we can unpack some of the options that you have.
So I already mentioned that I had the creatures, so hopefully you have an overwhelming stampede. That's the hope and dream, thoughts and prayers, cross your fingers, hope you can kill poor Elspeth here, which wasn't working out apparently in these games, and players didn't know that. The second one is I do have cards like Breathe Your Last Breath, which is for 1 colorless and 2 black. You get a card that will kill a planeswalker or a creature. There is a certain subset of that, but because of the thematic restrictions, they're not as prevalent. I just don't have the art. It doesn't meet my requirements of the aesthetic. So the way I decided to solve this, I had an aha moment. I could cut her or I could approach her, right? And I already had kind of a micro removal attack kind of idea, thinking it from 40,000 feet. What could I do to increase the ability of things to attack, make the creatures also be a threat to a planeswalker, so that I couldn't say the reason why Stu lost is because, you didn't have the correct removal spell at that moment in time where I dropped this devastating thing on the board. So I interjected the idea of unblockable. And I believe that was actually a suggestion of some of the players. Like, I'm okay with her remaining, but I would like to be able to provide and I went flying ? And they're like, no, we want more than flying. Because then my flying has to be less than, say, 3, or it has to be 3 so it doesn't get blown up by her wrath. So she created problems, right? She keeps you kind of held to the ground, held from the air. They were like, well, just add in something, say, like Departed Deckhand, which I'll read this card, and I'm not going to read all these cards, but this will be an example of a solution that I kind of tracked down and had an aha moment. And I allowed this to kind of represent my blue package a little bit more than most. Departed Deckhand for 1 colorless and 1 blue. You get a creature, spirit, pirate, with a lovely woman on the deck here, and I don't know what she's doing. She's doing pirate things, for a 2/2. Whenever Departed Deckhand becomes the target of a spell, sacrifice it. Departed Deckhand can't be blocked except by spirits. Then you can pay 3 colorless and 1 blue. Another target creature you control can't be blocked this turn except by spirits. So this card became an interesting way, and it's not only going to solve planeswalkers, I know this, it's going to solve players ultimately, but it does allow another route for creatures to get through whenever they're being hindered in the air and on the ground. I added a lot to this package. Now I'm just going to turn this loose to the peanut gallery you guys have at it.
You know what I love about the adding unblockable in particular? Is that it's a thing that Elspeth herself doesn't care about or want. And that's the important part. Because the biggest issue with a card like Elspeth is that it's a card that can generate a problem. It's a card that's strong enough to win the game, but your way of counterplaying it always has to come with the caveat of what's stopping the Elspeth player from taking those cards, right? But once you add the context of, well, why would Elspeth take unblockable things? If you're trying to play a control deck with Elspeth as kind of like the finisher, unblockable doesn't do anything for you, right? And that's kind of what I love about it. That's all I wanted to add.
Where do you land with this, Kade?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting solution here. One of my first, just for my own personal predilections, and please don't take my word as gospel on this. I'm just a casual observer. I hang out here. My first thought would be, especially with a single card challenge, is what's the likelihood of moving that one card? So like I would pose probably first, like, how attached are you to this particular version of Elspeth?
Very.
The reason being, a card.
Very. She's like
reasonably so.
That was the
because
she is iconic. And she is special to the cube.
She's also not the only Elspeth.
No, but
and that was where I was going to go.
Yeah,
is that like you don't always have the ability to replace a card with the same character. In this case, there happen to be redundant options, but it's like that would be a place to begin to say, is this card does this card align with my goals, and is that something I want to change? And I think for you to be able to comfortably look and say, yep, this is valuable to me and I want it in the environment, then you've done an awesome thing by finding a lane that lets you keep it here and provide an alternate avenue for engaging with it.
And then hope to God, like May said, that they don't use Departed Deckhand in the Elspeth deck, because then I've just done everything wrong. But, we can't predict these things, right? But I kind of want to take this minute, too, to kind of plug our good friend Usman, which I will include this in the show notes, and I actually want to have Usman on. Usman, I know you're listening. I want to have you on to talk about this article you've written about macro and micro cube design, because he goes down a lot more different levels and tiers, and I will include that in the show notes, because I don't know if that necessarily always applies to the language that we're using right now, because he gives instances, but it actually, as I was reading his article, it kind of shows how we kind of speak the same language as we talk about things, but it becomes kind of twisted to our own little vernacular and how we want to bend it, because the way I kind of phrased that overarching is I had a micro problem, an individual card, and I solved it through a macro solution, even though by adding the unblockables, in my mind, they were adding to the macro concept of the attack strategy, or the way of threatening a planeswalker, to include creatures and some form of evasion if we attach that to a creature, direct planeswalkers kill, and or some kind of burn that can deal with them. So that, to me, is a macro concept coming after a micro problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's so valuable there is that, Anthony, it plays right to the goal that you have in mind. If your goal is, I want this card to thrive in this environment, to be a powerful thing that can be answered, then you've made those changes based on what your goal is. I just think that's really critical when you're approaching any changes in a cube design.
I have a question for you.
Is this a secret question you were holding up?
No. First of all, why was Elspeth such a problem?
They defined it. I didn't really...
Was it the lack of individual card removal? So let's say, for example, this is in the cube. Players have said this is a problem. If there were 0 or an extremely small number of cards that directly said destroy planeswalkers or remove planeswalkers in any way, then I would say that's not just an Elspeth problem, right? That's a planeswalker problem. Something that we've talked about in other episodes.
At first, we do our card ride home from KubeCon. We've done this at every one of them. I'm sure you do too, where you kind of process all the feedback that we've either received or we're going to receive in the future about how our cubes that were featured, what the experience might be like, and what changes do you think we're going to make, right? So I remember receiving this from like 2 people at the table. They enjoyed the environment very much, but they had some feedback and they asked my permission. It was so interesting. Like, may I have your permission? I love that little interchange that we do, right? Hey, Kade, may I tell you what I don't like about your cube in the politest way ever? But it is what we do. It's a very polite way of doing it. And so they asked my permission and they gave me feedback and it was constructive. And Elspeth came up like twice. And I didn't really have a lot of context to it. I remember almost being borderline dismissive about it when they said, well, when this got played, I just couldn't deal with it. Well, that's kind of like, the garbage didn't take itself out to me. I'm like, the garbage truck drove off and left my garbage. I was like, well, what did you do to kind of solve that? That's what I was thinking. And that was a little bit dismissive for me to do that initially. So I went into the tank a little bit with this one more than I should. And I looked at it I guess I went macro. I went 40,000 feet in the air and I looked at my cube and I go, all right, what are the ways that I would deal with Elspeth? And the first thing I was thinking, you didn't run enough creatures. That was wrong. I shouldn't have thought that at all, because that's not true nor fair, because this card loves to kill creatures. That's what it does. So creatures are off the table. So I can't sit there and dismiss what they're saying because their creatures can't kill Elspeth. Then I was like, well, why didn't they counter it, right? Well, maybe they're not in blue, so I have to kind of let that go. Then I go, well, why didn't they run the iterations, which are very small, breathe your last breath? Well, I can't really do that either. Well, why didn't you double spell and hit it with 2, a lightning strike or a lightning bolt or whatever you got, right? Some version of that, and just double spell and take care of it. That's also, after a while, I started realizing that I was being unreasonable in the approach, that this card, from my memory, as you stated, Kade, has killed me a bunch of times. And for me to sit there and try to, I guess, solve it on the fly right in front of them wasn't fair with the initial thoughts as I was processing this problem. So I had to step back and look at, well, how would I deal with Elspeth if it came out? Well, I'm not in blue. What if I'm Jund? Well, I'm in trouble. How do I kill it? With this card, I guess. Well, I got to have this perfect card at this perfect time. You see the problems here, right? And she started presenting all these problems. That's how I come to the conclusion that, well, why don't I just make these creatures viable again? Why don't I wake them up with something like, and I'll give another card that'll make this more, make sense to the listeners, even though you have to be in blue, it is splashable. Enter the Enigma for 1 blue. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Draw a card. So I gave you a cantrip that incentivized you to attack something or the player anyways. These are the type of little micro changes, or part of the macro package, if we're going to bend the semantics around, that I started to do to try to twist and solve this problem without cutting this card. That means I feel like more than just to me, but to the cube.
I feel like it's interesting that originally you said about countering it. Well, what if I'm not playing blue? Now I'm in trouble. And now we've got 3 out of the 4 examples that we have for dealing with this monstrous white planeswalker are all blue.
Well, there's a lot more. I just didn't include them in the show notes.
I think you should probably mention it, if no other reason than the benefit of the people who are listening. What other I think this is a legitimate point, right? Because you've identified this as a problem. Here's maybe, I love the stack of micros that you mentioned. I think that's a fantastic expression for it. So we've got the unblockable package. This is blue. Black has got Breathe Your Last. That's a direct removal spell for a planeswalker. Where else did you go? Was there a much larger stack of those micro changes to make a macro change to deal with this one singular problem?
Creature, Burn, Haste, and Trample were the other pieces I started tearing apart. Anything that could overrun, get in before she got to, do her next step kind of thing, right? Because you don't have a whole lot of time to start dealing with this Elspeth. Of course, I think Kade, what's your normal play pattern with this most of the time?
Well, for Elspeth specifically, it depends on the board, and its versatility is part of what makes it so powerful. So,
yep,
it's based on what the biggest threat is, you hope the biggest threat is you.
This card is so strong because you're behind in the game, you can stabilize. You're ahead of the game, you can hold it down. It plays at all parts of a game state for you. That's what makes this card such a threat.
Well, I think there's something really interesting about this that I'd love to mention briefly. Just that, you're receiving feedback from players, and you've discussed with different guests, or you've thought through at different times how it's impossible to get enough data to make informed decisions about our cubes. We do our best with what we have, but even being drafted dozens of times doesn't give us a complete picture of what an environment looks like. So knowing that that's insufficient for what we're aiming for, and recognizing that we can't solve every problem. There's not a perfect version of our cube that we're aiming for. Kind of cycles back to the idea of your goal. As much as it's desirable to make people feel heard and to want to make adjustments for each person that has a challenge with an element of your design, it's also looking at, well, what do I want? Or what is the outcome? What's the experience that I'm hoping players have? And so I think Elspeth we've kind of camped on this idea here, but if the desire is, I want this to be a big spooky game ending threat, I want this to land and be a powerful card that draws everything around itself. Well, do we need to plant a solution in every color? Does red need to have an answer for this? Do I want red to be able to answer this the same way? Does everybody need to have a silver bullet for Elspeth? Or do I want the experience to be, hey, this is a centerpiece of the cube in a way, or this is something that when it hits the table, I want players to recognize it for what it is as a powerful, important piece.
And I will piggyback on that, right? Because I could not agree more. Not every color is going to have or needs to have, and in my humble opinion, should have a silver bullet to deal with everything, every large threat, especially at this 6+ mana, right? So are there opportunities, instead of I need to provide ways for all the other colors to deal with this one singular problem, what about the possibilities of, were there the possibilities, the options for you as the curator of this cube to say, instead of providing all these silver bullets to other colors, do they all instead get their own Elspeth?
Yes, that does happen. They all have their own version of a threat. There are planeswalkers across every color. And I want to add one more piece. I chose singular blue patterns in this to allow it to be splashable or enter sideboards if their mana was able to be made. I didn't want to make this exclusive double pip blue for something that was so important with dealing with a Liliana or a Chandra either. We focused on Elspeth, but there are other planeswalkers in here that will be equally as problematic, that this blue package that you now will choose to sideboard in and splash and play that one blue source in order to enter the Enigma if needed, right? I mean, it's just a bad case for you there, but I want to lay that out as an example. May?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that what's important to note about a lot of these pieces is that, yes, even though that they can act as a silver bullet towards planeswalkers, it is also important to note that you also introduced packages that can be used in other contexts, right? If somebody's trying to go for unblockable things, they're not going to have worse off cards because they're like, no, I need to hold on to this unblockable just for Elspeth. No, they're going to look at unblockable things and say, hey, I want to do unblockable things. And the Elspeth player is going to be like, shoot, they have unblockable things. I should probably play around that. or wait for them to use it early and then play Elspeth. And that creates dynamic gameplay.
So to kind of bring this back into this idea of the circle, tie it off real quick, this grouping may have been 5, 6 cards, which still lands on that quantitative value that may defined as a micro change to impact a macro concept, to make that really make your head explode a little bit. I wanted everything that could attack a planeswalker from all different directions to be multifaceted, but I added a few cards to give a few more to wake creatures up in a micro idea. That's where these two kind of rivers converge, right, on this language.
If I will, because there was the question that I talked about in the pregame, right? And Kade, you said it yourself, right? This is a 6-mana planeswalker. What if the other colors haven't done enough before this 6-mana planeswalker comes down? Then maybe that's, is that a player problem? Is that, where else, what other issues might there be? And I suppose my question, or maybe a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the person who's playing Elspeth, they can actually make other plays in the first 5 turns of the game. I wasn't sure if that was, we needed to mention that, but there may have been previous plays by the Elspeth player.
All right, moving on to the next part.
They didn't just sit around and wait for 6 turns to play Elspeth.
Yeah, I think that's assumed. I believe we just kind of let's move over to another kind of grouping here. This is another one I just did this week and kind of what spawned this thought process. So my artifact cube, I've been looking at it underneath a lens here, prepping for CubeCon 2025, and I'm just trying to, I guess, flesh out cards that I feel like are underperformers or going unnoticed or not really doing what I thought they should be doing as individuals. So from a macro standpoint, I've always struggled as an archetypal overarching idea in that cube, nor did I really want to inject it a great deal, was a form of reanimator. Whether it be artifact reanimation or creature reanimation, just 40,000 feet looking at the cube holistically, it's not really a strongly supported concept in that cube. Sure, you can get them back to your hand, you can replay them, etc., but that's more of a grave digger type of idea. We can call that reanimator light if you want to in your mind, right? Not really put it back onto the battlefield. Not a great deal. So a while back, and I believe this was CubeCon number 1, I decided, because they had this sweet art that came out with 40K, I thought Beacon of Unrest would be a neat card to put in this cube. And for 3 colorless and black, you get a sorcery. Put target artifact or creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Shuffle Beacon of Unrest into its owner's library. I could tear this card apart. I'm not quite sure my thought process. I think let's kind of do this. Let's get into the headspace of Anthony when I added this card. Oh, this could be really cool. They pay 5 mana and they get back their some kind of gear Hulk onto the battlefield, and oh my gosh, they win the game. It's going to be so sick. Or they get just a plain old artifact that's super critical, like a KCI component. They pay 5 mana for whatever reason. They decide to put it back on the battlefield. I wasn't thinking about timing and pacing the game. I just happened to remember this from a commander brain experience that later down the road, this is going to pop up again in your deck, and you're going to do it all over again. You're going to pay 5 more mana, and you're going to do it again. And you're going to do it 3 to 4 times in a commander game. This card is going to be super impactful. So before I even tear this card down any more than I am, I was thinking, had all these broad thoughts, like, I was like, what inspired me to put this card here anyways? It's 5 mana. It's really kind of a Days Gone By idea a little bit. I wanted to kind of have something that felt like real animator, but was on theme with great art and all these things. But then I started thinking, not even sure where my headspace was when I added this card. It's kind of a card of yesteryear and Days Gone By, as I mentioned. I'm kind of rambling now. But today's Modern Magic, removing myself away from this macro concept, if I wanted to fix this whole idea of a reanimator package that's kind of non-existent, I got to thinking there's got to be a card that's way better than this card for 5 mana. And I think this is kind of a micro change that I did here by comparison. I'm going to put Kade here on the spot and do the usual role that we put on May. Would you mind reading this next card that's to the right of Beacon Unrest, please, for the audience? And we'll kind of talk this idea out between these 2 cards.
Sure, the card in question is Gix's Command. 3 generic, black, for a sorcery. Choose 2, since it's a command after all. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 creature. It gains lifelink until end of turn. Destroy each creature with power 2 or less is the second mode. Number 3 is return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. And the fourth says each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power among creatures they control.
So going back to our language you used, and before we start breaking this down, what I wanted to mention before, we were talking about quantitative versus qualitative, macro versus micro. And when we first kind of defining, I guess, the idea of quantitative and macro, we were using numbers. May said 5 or less, or 10 or less, and greater than, and equals to. And we started kind of doing that, right, from a conversational standpoint. But then we
started mentioning percentages and numbers, and your eyes just glazed over.
Yeah. We started going to decimal dust, and things started getting lost. But then we also started entering the idea of impact. That's what Kade interjected into the conversation. So maybe it's 2 cards, but it changes the whole world, right? It has an overarching effect. It like changes the vibe of the cube. So Beacon and the Rest was there to support a overarching archetypal idea that was kind of non-existent, that I was trying to insert this little micro concept of, I paid 5 mana, I get my big thing back. Didn't work out. Nobody played it. Nobody wanted it. Felt antiquated. Cool card, antiquated. Then we insert a card like Gix's Command that has a broader reach, more impactful. Yes, this is a 1 card for 1 card change. But in my mind, and I want your opinion, Beacon and Rest was not impactful. No one cared. Just got unplayed. Moved to Gix's Command that whenever I said I'm going to add this to my cube, play group lit up like a bunch of light bugs and started talking about all the different avenues and impact of this singular card and how it'll have reach into multiple avenues of the cube. Now, if we're looking at quantity, it's 1. If we look at impact, I think it's a much larger order of magnitude. Am I off base in saying that, Kade and May? Is that overreaching?
Well, my dangerous follow-up is, have you play tested it yet?
Nope. Going in straight.
Hooray! We love point blank theory casting.
If we don't know, this is Anthony's MO. Yeah, this is Anthony's MO. Is hey, it's 3 days before I've got to submit my list for a CubeCon. Let's just go ahead and put Kappa Cannoneer in the artifact queue because that'll be totally cool, right? No problem there.
I emailed them. They said yes.
Very on brand. So the thing that I will note compared to, say, Kappa Cannoneer is that, yes, this is a good card, right? Do I feel that this is a bomb card, though, right? It's good. It does a lot of things that are good. It is flexible. It can get a lot of value. These are all like really good things about this card. However, Kappa Cannoneer was basically a card that said, hey, if this sticks around, you just win the game. Like, introducing one card that says, hey, I win the game versus a card that just gets a lot of value is, like, a huge scope of difference. Right?
I blame my little brother Josh for the Kappa Cannoneer incident. He told me to go buy that precon and insert that card immediately. I wrote an email, and they said, yes, you may add that to your cube. And then we played it, and oh my God, people lost their minds. So let's, I'm just saying, Kappa Cannoneer did not work out.
Yeah, we certainly don't mean to reanimate the past for you there, Anthony. That wasn't the intent.
You meant to beacon unrest it. You wanted to beacon unrest it to them.
The most important part of that, though, was the fact that when it comes to like the scale of a qualitative change, you are having to ask how likely that card is going to end up in every deck. Kappa Cannoneer is going to end up in any deck that can functionally play it, versus this card's going to end up in the decks that care about these things.
Let's be clear. In Anthony's artifact cube, any deck that can support Kappa Cannoneer is any deck that can produce 1 blue pip of mana. That's it. You don't need any other qualifier for being able to play it. The whole cube is a gazillion artifacts. Putting them onto the battlefield each turn is relatively straightforward. It has pseudo hexproof with its ward 4, which might as well be hexproof.
Kade, I love how he says pseudo, by the way. Isn't that adorable?
Pseudo.
Delightful.
So that's my stage name.
If I can zoom us out just a tiny bit so we don't get hung up on the specific cards, I think this is a good example of something that you can tackle in a couple different ways. You know, you mentioned, Anthony, that you had considered, is there a reanimation package and is it working or not? And I think one of the most helpful pieces as you were describing that was noting that players weren't picking, thanks dog, players weren't picking Beacon of Unrest very highly. You know, you said I think you described it as like kind of making the rounds at the table, and
you
like
sounded
just didn't really find it
like Tommy on the room. You're like, hi, doggy.
Hello, dog.
Hello, doggy.
I will make a comment. I actually don't think you need a reanimate package. Can I insert that in there? And I want you to let me know how you feel about that. I don't think you need Beak of Unrest to be part of a reanimate package, but I will say you could probably identify it as a need or a potential win con for a mid-range, for a Jundy style kind of package in the cube? Was that something that you thought was going to be an archetype that was viable that ended up not being, or was it just that, hey, I don't really see a way to get big creatures into my graveyard, so I'm not going to bother playing it?
Well, we'll come back to Kate, because Kate has a follow-up, but I was applying a macro concept if I wanted Reanimator as an overarching, and then using a micro response, a single card, to satisfy that idea, and it didn't work out. And then just abandoned it entirely. Kate, continue your thought, please.
Oh, that's okay. Just trying to stick on that theme of like, is the archetype, is that a goal? Is that something you want to support, or is it being supported? And whether or not it's a goal, if players aren't playing into it, well, then, that impacts that decision. So I think this is a cool example of like, this single card is not working, right? It's not doing what you're after. So then you have some paths around it. You could look at like what we did with the previous card and say, well, I want to adjust things around to make sure that this is a viable choice, or I can just swap this card. And picking something that's flexible like a command is certainly going to light up your group, because you have a lot of choices.
There's no wrong route there, yes.
And it doesn't even, and all these changes can look different too. It doesn't always have to be exactly 5 minutes or 5-minute sorcery. And I know you're really big into the spreadsheet aesthetics of trying to make sure those match. And so like being able to find a card that meets those needs for you, that meets those goals, that you can swap in, that may point in different directions, is a great way to do it.
Hi, my name's Anthony.
So
I like numbers and
that.
spreadsheets. Yes.
Hi, Anthony.
I think the funniest part
I like
about
balance.
this particular example is, imagine if this card, just humor me for a second. Imagine that Anthony pulled another Kappa Cannoneer and decided, yes, I want to reintroduce like a Reanimator package, and decided to introduce Recurring Nightmare, right? Over this card.
That would be pretty sick, actually. Yeah.
The reason I'm mentioning this is because when I see this card, it's just like Recurring Nightmare at home. But my point is that let's entertain the idea that it was a Recurring Nightmare, right? Like, that is a good card. That is actively a defining card. It doesn't need a huge package, because it itself is its own thing, and trying to have your deck try to dig for it is part of its deck. Versus, this is an example of, you have one card that does one thing. Is this a package, or is this just a singular card change, right? And that's kind of what Kade was implying earlier, where it's just like, whether or not it's a micro or a macro change to kind of bring this in is hinged on whether or not that, like, this archetype is real, so to speak. And the quality of that card compared to the density of the cards that do those effects is a big factor. And that's just all I wanted to mention.
So, okay, so let's roll out another one. That we've kind of done that one. Let's go through one more example. We'll keep this a lot quicker. And I'm going to ask a question to Kade. Kade, if I tell you I have a 180 Naya cube, what's your kind of overarching expectations that you'd find in a cube like that? Just what's the speed and the velocity, and what kind of creatures would you find in a Naya cube?
Well, my friend, if there's anything I've learned after talking to so many people who have curated cubes, is that I have no idea what to expect out of an unknown cube.
You know what? You're right.
But in the blind, if we were drawing from I don't know what we would expect in Naya, you're probably looking at creatures, probably looking at some generally more aggressive leaning, generally more creature than non-creature on average, possibly enchantments. But these are all broad brush strokes that may be missing the wall we're after entirely.
No, you're not. You're not. So my good friend Samich has a Naya cube, and it's aggressively tilted. It's very much zoo-oriented, right? Even if I broke this into little subsets and I said, hey, Kade, what do you think the colors Boros represent? You'd say aggro. What if I said, hey, Kade, what do you think the subset of colors Gruul, green, red equal to you? You'd kind of say kind of mid-range aggro, right? Aggro-aggressive type of attacking creatures. So,
white green is hippie aggro.
Yeah, hippie aggro. They're literally sitting there. It's like 420 somewhere. We're going to aggro out. Yeah, no, let's aggro tomorrow. But
You're welcome.
Well, you got yourself with that one.
Laughing at my own joke. Sorry, I just got my own punchline.
So unlike you, Anthony, as well. So unlike you.
So Chris wanted to add a little bit of air quotes, and this is going to be, I can't think of a finer word to say. He wanted to add some depth and intelligence to the aggressive type packages. And a solution that he originally had in the first iteration of the cube was landfall or land triggers type matters type idea, right? You could add some counters and add some, when this land equals, it makes something larger, and it adds some kind of depth to the gameplay experience outside of, say, Savannah Lions, right? All the time. They're just coming at you. He wanted some layers to the cube. But he added a note and sent us in a little clip. One of the experiences he had from a overarching macro concept of this cube was that it was fast. Everything's aggressive. It's zoo. People know what zoo does. They come at you, they turn sideways, they attack you, you do combat tricks, etc., right? I mean, it's just the nature of that color subset. Yes, you can throw enchantments and have hippie aggro if you want to, but I can't, still gonna crack myself up. Thank you, May. But as we kind of progressed through that idea, he just had a difficulty with speed. That package could not keep up. And if we're going to go look at it at a micro level, he had one specific card that he wanted to design around. May, there's a card in the show notes that, could you explain to the listeners what it is? Because I think this might be near and dear to your heart, and his struggle was real. It was Countryside Crusher. Could you tell the audience what this card does? I don't think you know what it does.
I know what you're talking about. I've never heard of this card. 1 red for a 3/3 giant warrior. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it into your graveyard and repeat this process. Whenever a land card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Countryside Crusher. So, half note here. This card is cool because it also overlaps with aggro stuff. Because it's like, hey, I just guarantee you have gas at this point. I'm not drawing lands. I'm always drawing a real card. And that's pretty sweet. However, it overlapping into this kind of lands matter or funny meme Countryside Crusher deck. And this I relate to this struggle very intently because trying to make lands matter Countryside Crusher like as a deck work is difficult. It is not easy to get that deck to work. But in the context of what the environment's needs were, the problem is that this was an example of, I would almost say, a bait, right? Where it kind of gives that assumption of, cool, this is like a cool card that can lead its way well into this big stupid thing that can turn sideways, and oh no, the rest of this environment is just too aggressive for this deck. It's just not going to have any real wheels because by the time that you get to any of your real like lands matter cards, the game's already over type thing. And there is a case where let's say, micro change in the sake of having Countryside Crusher, as opposed to having something else that can stave off aggro or fulfill some different function of aggro and so on and so forth. This comes with the connotation that it is an almost archetype defining type card, but whether or not that's going to be relevant for your environment, it has to be based on the context. So, I'm
thinking, can I get a bunch of MDFC cards in here, maybe outside of something constructed? Because I'm looking at this.
MDFCs always count as the non-land part. Well, non-land card first.
Is there any cards that you can kind of flip over
correct,
where they're not, or where they're lands though, where you can draw them and then flip them over so they're not the land side? I don't know.
No,
I'm kind of.
They always are counted as the non-creature side first.
Just ask the judge.
I remember
literally,
that
we're sitting here struggling. There's a
judge.
There's a judge in the room.
welcome.
Literally, judge.
I appreciate the insinuation that as a judge, I will know all 35,000 Magic cards by heart, just ready to rattle them off.
At least 34,000.
Is that not on the test? It should be on the test. Name all 35,000 Magic cards.
No, that shouldn't be on the test.
May is right. Generally, these are all the non-land side on the front and land on the back.
Okay. Because otherwise I'm looking...
Part of that, not that anybody asked, but part of that is practically because if it's a spell that you're going to cast, either creature or a non-creature spell, you want to have it in hand so you can be looking at it and considering it. And if you're going to play it as a land, that's the easiest side to summarize on the back. So you want your most information on the front, least information on the back.
See, I don't disagree with that. What I would argue, and I think this is maybe a rules gripe more than anything, is that they should count as both. It is technically a land card, even though I have to turn the card out of the sleeve and put it in maybe just halfway like they do in the tournaments. Like, surely that should be a thing.
Stu is so leaning into the micro concept of this conversation.
Well, that's how I'm
We're
thinking.
trying to get this macro again.
I'm ruling
If I were
that
to introduce a
if it's my
package to
cube.
support this and make it work,
Yes.
for context, I did. Right? In my environment, I have the Swans package as well. Swans of Bryn Argol.
Swans of Bryn Argol.
Thank you.
See, he's a
That
judge.
Swans has a bunch of combos with things like Molten Vortex. Point is that there's a bunch of overlap between Countryside Crusher and things that let you like weaponize the lands from your hands. So if I wanted to introduce a package, which I have, a large part of that was finding ways to weaponize those lands from your hand, or more importantly, weaponize the lands in the graveyard. So think Life from the Loam. Think decks that care about lands entering the graveyard, things that care about playing lands from the graveyard, so on and so forth. If you wanted to build a package, you would have to give a little bit more definition than just, yes, this just happens to care about lands, therefore it's part of package. It was what I was kind of trying to imply with the Countryside Crusher, because it is a deceptively definitive card for its archetype.
So as we kind of close this out, let's bend back these words of semantics here. Let's pull it back into what we're talking about, macro, micro, and make this even more confusing to anyone that might be listening. The driver of the concept is he wanted the card Countryside Crusher to kind of be a centerpiece, a micro concept, a driver, a singular card if we're using quantity as the driver of that word. From an impact standpoint, it's a much more macro driver because it has far reach. You said it creates a package around itself. I mean, if you run this card alone, it's just not going to be successful. You really want to support it. And tethered it to the idea of a Lands Matters package that was unsuccessful, a huge chunk of the cube at the time in this Naya cube, right? And decided that Lands Matters just wasn't keeping up with the aggro speed of the cube, had to find other solutions. So I had to come up with an overarching macro solution to the cube, looking at the whole cube, like a balance of everything, right? All 180 cards had to be inspected at that point. That's a bigger reach, a bigger look, is what I'm trying to say. But the driver was a singular card and then arch out from that. That's where it gets weird and ill-defines what we're trying to say to begin with. If I haven't confused everyone listening at this point, I'm going to try harder.
I have a Cliff Notes version. All right, you ready for this? A micro change would be getting rid of Countryside Crusher in favor of another more relevant splashable card. A macro change would be introducing a new package that cares about lands in a way that buffs Countryside Crusher.
Kind of like what I did with the Elspeth anti-attack system. Yep. Yes, the countermeasures.
Yep. I've been jotting down some notes to try to summarize some of these ideas. I think something that may be helpful is, as you're thinking about whether you're looking at micro or macro and using it as a scale here, thinking about what can I change? What changes can I or should I make? I've kind of broken that up into 3 spots for people to think about as they're looking at their own changes. So I think the easiest to think about from the micro side of the scale is just a single card, right? Just swapping in and out. That's the most simple change to make. It's the lowest impact on your environment because it doesn't come up as frequently in drafts. You're going to see it on board maybe once or twice here and there. From that, I'd scale it up to like you're midway between micro and macro to like swapping out an archetype or a package like you're talking about. Just a couple of cards that work well together. Thinking about like what types of cards are we changing? Are we swapping out glue or enabler? Do we want to consider how we think about singleton when we're making changes like that? Do I just need to see more of a type of effect to fill in a space? And then like think about what sort of connections those changes have. What other things do those touch as we're pulling those in and out that are going to engage? You talk about like unblockability to engage with planeswalkers. Well, that's also going to change how aggro looks, change how interaction looks on that side too. And then really at the top end, if we want to go full macro, I'd probably summarize that as something like a play pattern is how I wrote it down. But just the idea that we're shifting how a whole portion of the cube is going to play. These are where you're considering things like, what does the mana value look like of my environment? Is it too high? Is it too low? Am I seeing things sooner than I want or later than I want? Try bumping mana different directions on things like removal. Like speed of the environment. You talked about an aggro type of thing. Does that mean I need to see more instant speed interactions? Does that mean I want to see things slow down by bumping the sorcery speed? Do I need fewer creatures to have haste or enters the battlefield effects? Or then finally, like, are individual cards too efficient? Not like a single card basis, but if you look down your run, do I have a lot of 3/2s for 2? Do I have a lot of Goblin Rabble Masters and friends that are just going to take over the game by themselves? That may be the sort of thing that you have to look broader than just, hey, this one card or this one idea is a problem, but to say, is the holistic experience of the cube going to need some tuning to get to a space that I want? Forgive me for rolling through all that. I just thought as we were thinking, those divisions help a lot.
That's a perfect wrap up.
That is.
And put question marks on the back of all those because I want those to be thoughts that the listeners are having to hopefully invoke a few of these ideas so they can ask this upon themselves or their peers, right? So, Kade, now that we've had you on the show, and I'm super excited to have you on, where can the listeners find you, and where can they find Recross the Paths? I'll link all that in, but why should they listen to you? And why? And another thing, too, how do they get on this wait list for them to talk to you? Because they want to talk to you about their cube. There's got to be a list, like droves of people, like a water park.
That's a wild and dangerous set of questions. Let me answer the safest ones first. The podcast, as I noted, is hosted wherever podcasts are. I hang out in Discord more or less. I have a Bluesky account, but I'm an old man, I guess, and I don't know how to. Right, I haven't really posted, so you can reach out wherever it's most convenient for you, and I'll do my best to connect. Why should you listen to the show? I don't know that you should, but if you're interested in Cube and hearing from other cool people that are doing the thing, my hope is just to champion what other people are doing. So if you're curious about what else is going on in the Cube space, you want to get inspirations or ideas, or just hear what some of your friends are up to, that would be a good reason to explore there.
And let's take Stu, take us over to the socials, please. Let's take Stu to the mall.
Let's take Stu to the mall. All right, first of all, as always, to our Patreons, to Patrick, to Jeff, to Nick, to Chris, to Timber Dragon, to Brian Christensen, to Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Nicola Point, Preston, and Sam, a big thank you, as always, for the ongoing support.
If you want to become a Patreon and support the channel, we would appreciate it. And thank you for all the Patreons for supporting us this long, and we appreciate you. We couldn't keep the lights on.
That's right.
Stu can't afford light bulbs anymore.
I cannot.
They're really expensive.
We're sitting in the dark right now. Plus, I actually wanted to mention that I've been brainstorming some ideas recently for some cool perks to come up with for our Patreons. Again, we thank you for the ongoing support. So I've been throwing around some ideas with Anthony about potentially doing some Draft Master drafts, maybe some Magic Online drafting.
I think I'm going to do Arena because I don't like MTGO.
Well,
so I'm going to probably OBS that.
I'm going to coach you on Magic Online. And maybe that's something else I can offer for our Patreons. If you need some Magic Online help, I will be there for you.
Bad.
But it's incredible, trust me. If you want to get in on the conversation at facebook.com/groups/MTGCube, where there's at least 15 people. 30 people?
12 and a half.
People, 12 and a half.
We got half person, yeah.
So the 12 and you. Okay. Yeah. Lots of cool discussion going on there. If you want to support the show, you can use our inkedgaming.com/UberCube affiliate link. Get all kinds of custom and large volume products there for your Magic experience. You can find us at Bluesky, ubercubemtgpodcast.bsky.social, or at Twitter at ubercubemtgpod. If you've got a longer comment or question about the podcast, you can reach us via email, ubercubemtgpodcast@gmail.com. As always, come hang out with us on the Discord. And once again, a big thanks to all of our Patreons. You can come check us out on YouTube at Ubercube MTG Podcast 747 for the Jumbo experience. But thank you again.
And then other than that, and we're going to say the thing that we always say here at Ubercube is Happy Cubing. Macro.
Perfect.
Economics.